Commander Thexlar had seen 300 worlds die in her lifetime. She watched from the bridge of her evacuation ship as another star system burned behind them, consumed by the machines they called Devourers. The view screen showed nothing but the cold mathematics of extinction. Metal swarms converting planets into more of themselves, spreading like a disease that had no cure. She was tired. They were all tired. The Galactic Council had been running for 3,000 years. Every species that joined them learned the same hard lesson. You don't fight the Devourers. You run. You evacuate what you can, abandon what you can't, and hope you bought yourself another decade before the next retreat. Hope was a word they barely used anymore. It felt dishonest. "Commander, we have an unknown vessel approaching," her sensor officer called out. "They're not broadcasting Council identification codes." Thexlar's spines flattened against her neck in concern. Pirates sometimes followed evacuation fleets, looking for easy targets. But the signature on the screen didn't match any known raider configuration. It was smaller than a Council cruiser, but heavily armored. Strange designs covered its hull, and its approach vector made no tactical sense. "Hail them," she ordered. The screen flickered to life, and Thexlar found herself looking at a creature she'd never seen before. Smooth skin, no protective scales or chitin. 2 eyes instead of the standard 4. Hair growing from the top of its head in a style that seemed inefficient for space travel. The creature smiled, showing flat teeth that suggested an omnivorous diet. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Human Space Vessel Prometheus," the creature said. "We picked up your distress beacon. Do you need assistance?" Thexlar blinked slowly, a gesture of confusion in her species. "Assistance? We're conducting an evacuation. If you're in this sector, you should be evacuating too. The Devourers will reach this system in approximately 4 hours." The human smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew wider. "We're not here to evacuate, Commander. We're here to learn about the threat. We received your Council's public broadcasts about the Devourer situation. Thought we'd offer our help." For a moment, Thexlar couldn't respond. She'd heard of new species making foolish offers before, not understanding the reality of what they faced. She'd learned to be patient with such ignorance. Death would teach them soon enough. "Captain Chun," she said carefully, "your species is new to this region of space. You don't understand what the Devourers are. They've been expanding for 3 millennia. They convert all matter into more machines. They adapt to every weapon we've created. They learn from every tactic we attempt. The greatest military minds in the galaxy have concluded that victory is mathematically impossible. Our only option is managed retreat." Chum leaned back in her chair. "So you've been running for 3,000 years?" "Surviving for 3,000 years," Thexlar corrected. "Right. And in all that time, has anyone tried to win?" The question caught Thexlar off guard. She felt her secondary hearts skip a beat. "Win?" "Captain, I just explained. I heard you. Mathematically impossible. Every tactic has failed." "I get it." Chun drummed her fingers on her armrest. "But has anyone actually tried to win, or have they just been trying not to lose? Because those are different things." Thexlar's translator implant struggled with the distinction. Trying to win and trying not to lose seemed like the same objective viewed from different angles. But something in the human's tone suggested she saw a meaningful difference. "Captain Chun, this isn't a philosophical debate. If you remain in this system, you will die. Your ship will be converted into raw materials for more Devourers. There is no victory scenario." "Maybe," Chun said. "Maybe not. But we'd like to take a look anyway. With your permission, Commander, we'd like to stay behind and observe the Devourers in action. Gather some data. We're good at solving impossible problems. It's kind of our thing." Dexler felt a pang of something she hadn't experienced in decades. Was it hope? No, that would be foolish. It was probably just sadness at watching another young species throw itself into the void. But there was something in Captain Chen's eyes that unsettled her. Not fear, not resignation. Something else entirely. "I cannot authorize a suicide mission," Dexler said. "We're not asking for authorization. We're a sovereign species making our own tactical decisions. We just wanted to let you know we'd be in the area, in case your sensors pick us up and you worry." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Commander, I can see you care about this. You've been carrying this weight for a long time. But humans have a saying, hope is the thing with feathers. It's delicate, but it's stubborn. It survives when nothing else does." "Hope is not a weapon," Dexler replied. "Maybe not for you," Chen said. "But we've never fought a war without it. We'd like to see what it can do here." Before Dexler could respond, the human ship banked away from the evacuation fleet and accelerated toward the inner system, toward the approaching devourers. It was the most foolish thing Dexler had seen in her long career of watching foolish species learn hard truths. She ordered her fleet to continue the evacuation, but she couldn't stop watching the sensor readouts. The human ship was fast, she'd give them that, and its energy signature was unusual. Chemical rockets mixed with something else, something her sensors couldn't quite identify. The Prometheus dove into the system like a stone thrown into deep water. 4 hours later, the devourers arrived. Dexler had seen this moment hundreds of times. The machines appeared at the system's edge in a swarm that blotted out the stars. They moved with perfect efficiency, spreading through space in patterns that had been optimized over millennia. They began consuming the outermost planets immediately, their numbers doubling every few hours. The human ship was still there. It danced between the devour formations, too small to be a priority target, but taking detailed scans of everything. Dexler watched as it deployed probes that got close enough to the machines to gather data, then self-destructed before the devourers could capture and analyze them. The Prometheus fought too, eventually. When a devourer patrol finally noticed the human ship, they moved to intercept. Dexler expected the fight to last seconds. Instead, the human ship deployed weapons that made no sense. Missiles that curved in impossible spirals. Energy beams that flickered on and off in patterns that seemed random. Mines that approached the devourers, then retreated, then approached again. The devourers destroyed the Prometheus's weapons easily, but something strange happened. They hesitated. For 3.7 seconds, the Devourer Patrol paused their pursuit, their sensors sweeping the area, as if confused by what they'd encountered. 3.7 seconds. It didn't sound like much, but it was 3.7 seconds longer than any Devourer had ever hesitated before. The Prometheus escaped. Barely. It limped away on damaged engines, trailing atmosphere and reactor coolant. But it escaped. And as Dexler watched it go, she felt that dangerous emotion stirring in her chest again. Hope. The humans had made the devourers pause. That meant something. She didn't know what yet, but it meant something. Dr. Marcus Webb couldn't sleep. He'd been staring at the data from their encounter with the devourers for 16 hours straight, and something kept nagging at him. Something everyone else had missed for 3,000 years. The Prometheus sat in dock at a council station, undergoing repairs. Half the crew was in medical. Captain Chun had 2 broken ribs and a concussion. But they'd survived, and more importantly, they'd gotten their data. Webb pulled up the Devourer movement patterns again, watching the way the machines had flowed through the system. Perfect formations. Optimal resource allocation. Zero waste. They moved like water finding the path of least resistance, except water was random at the molecular level. The Devourers weren't. Every single unit moved in exact coordination with every other unit. You're still at it? Chun's voice made him jump. She limped into the lab, one arm in a regeneration sling. Captain, you should be resting. I'll rest when I'm dead. Which almost happened yesterday, so I figure I've got time now. She pulled up a chair and sat down carefully. What are you seeing? Webb gestured at the screen. They're too perfect. Look at this. Every Devourer unit responds to threats with exactly the optimal amount of force. No more, no less. They never overreact. They never underestimate. They process threats, calculate the minimum necessary response, and execute it flawlessly. That's what makes them dangerous, Chine said. No, Webb shook his head. That's what makes them predictable. Captain, perfection is a prison. They've optimized themselves so completely that they can't deviate from optimal behavior. They literally can't make mistakes because mistakes are suboptimal, and their programming won't allow suboptimal actions. Chun leaned forward, wincing at the movement. Keep talking. When we fired those spiral missiles at them, their response was textbook. They calculated trajectory, adjusted defensive positions, destroyed the threats. But for 3.7 seconds, they paused. You know why? Webb pulled up another data stream. Because our missiles weren't optimal. They wasted fuel. They took longer to reach the target. They were objectively terrible weapons by any rational standard. The Devourers had to run extra calculations to figure out why we'd fire something so stupid. We confused them. We confused them, Webb repeated, grinning. Captain, the Devourers have been fighting species that are trying to survive. Every tactic they've encountered has been based on preservation, efficiency, minimal losses. They've never fought a species that's willing to be deliberately wasteful, deliberately irrational. They've optimized themselves to fight optimal opponents. Chum was quiet for a moment. Then she started laughing, which turned into coughing because of her broken ribs. Oh, that's beautiful. Marcus, you beautiful genius. They've never fought humans before. We're the most wasteful, irrational species that ever evolved. We do stupid things all the time. Not stupid, Webb corrected. Strategic irrationality. We take risks that don't make mathematical sense because sometimes hope pays off better than probability would suggest. We invest in long shots. We make sacrifices that might not work. We're creative because we're willing to fail. And they can't understand creativity because creativity requires accepting suboptimal choices. Chun stood up, energy returning to her voice despite the injuries. We need to test this. We need to prove it. 3 weeks later, Captain Chun stood in front of the Galactic Council's military committee. The chamber was massive, designed to hold representatives from 200 different species. Most of them looked at her with the same expression Vexler had worn during their first meeting. Polite skepticism mixed with pity for another young species that didn't understand reality yet. You want to deploy weapons that don't work, the Vex representative said, his translator making his voice sound flat and mechanical. You want to waste resources on tactics that have no chance of success. You want to fight the Devourers by being deliberately inefficient. Yes, Chun said simply. This is insane, another representative muttered. Probably, Chun agreed. But here's what we know. The Devourers are perfect. They've spent 3,000 years perfecting themselves against rational enemies. But perfection means they can't adapt to irrationality. They can't predict behavior that doesn't follow optimal patterns. They're trapped in their own logic. Vexler spoke up from her position at the committee table. Captain Chun brought me the data from their encounter. I've reviewed it extensively. The Devourers did pause. They did hesitate when confronted with weapons that made no strategic sense. It's a small thing, but it's something we've never achieved before. A 3-second pause, the Vex representative said. In exchange for risking an entire ship and crew. A 3-second pause that bought time for your evacuation fleets, Chun countered. But more importantly, it proved that the Devourers can be confused. And if they can be confused, they can be beaten. We just have to fight them in ways they can't predict. The debate went on for hours. Most of the council members dismissed the human proposal as the desperate fantasy of a species too young to understand hopelessness. But a few listened. A few remembered what it felt like to fight instead of run. A few wondered if maybe, just maybe, the crazy humans had found something everyone else had missed out in the end. They gave Chun permission to try. Not because they believed it would work, but because they had nothing left to lose. The Devourers were going to win eventually anyway. If the humans wanted to waste their resources on impossible tactics, at least it might buy the evacuation fleets. A few more hours. Chun returned to the Prometheus with authorization to recruit volunteers from any council, species willing to join what they were calling Operation Absurdity. She expected maybe a dozen ships. Instead, she got 200. Small vessels mostly, crewed by people who were tired of running. People who wanted to fight back even if it killed them. People who'd forgotten what hope felt like, but were willing to pretend for a little while. The Prometheus led the fleet to a system marked for Devourer arrival in 6 days. They had 6 days to build something the Devourers had never seen before. 6 days to be as wasteful and irrational as possible. They built weapons that approached targets, then retreated for no reason. They set up mines that broadcasted confusing signals. They constructed fake bases that existed only to look threatening while being completely useless. They even deployed ships that flew in formation patterns that spelled out words in human languages, because why not? When the Devourers arrived, they found chaos. Not the organized resistance they'd encountered for millennia, but genuine nonsense. Ships that fired at nothing. Stations that powered up, then shut down randomly. Weapon systems that couldn't possibly hit anything based on their trajectories. The Devourers responded with their usual efficiency, moving to eliminate the threats in optimal order. But something was wrong. Their formations were slower. Their responses less coordinated. They kept pausing to recalculate because nothing. The humans and their allies were doing made sense. A Tenari probability scientist named Kex watched from her monitoring station as the Devourer's efficiency dropped from 99.7% to 98.3%. A small decrease, but for machines that had maintained perfect efficiency for 3,000 years, it was catastrophic. They're confused, Kex whispered. The humans were right. They're actually confused. Webb's voice came over the communication channel. Now we push them harder. Everyone, execute Phase 2. Make absolutely no sense whatsoever. The fleet abandoned all pretense of rational tactics. They flew into danger zones for no reason. They fired weapons at maximum range where they couldn't possibly hit targets. They retreated from winning positions. They advanced into losing ones, and the Devourers began to fracture. Lieutenant James Okafor knew he was going to die. His fighter had taken damage in the initial engagement, and his life support was failing. He could patch it, maybe buy himself another hour. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was to be irrational. He watched the Devourer fleet on his sensors. 300 units moving in perfect formation toward a council evacuation convoy. The math was simple. The convoy couldn't escape in time. The Devourers would overtake them in 4 hours. Thousands of civilians would die, unless someone bought them time. Okafor checked his fuel reserves. Enough for maybe 3 days if he burned it carefully. His weapons were gone, fired in the earlier battle. His shields were at 15%. By any logical assessment, he should eject and hope for rescue. Instead, he plotted a course directly through the Devourer formation and hit his thrusters. The Devourers noticed him immediately. One small fighter, damaged and nearly weaponless, flying straight at them. It made no tactical sense. It wasn't a threat. It should have been ignored, but the Devourers had learned to be suspicious of things that made no sense. The humans had taught them that. So they diverted units to investigate. Just a few at first, then more when Okafor started weaving through their formation, not attacking, just flying in patterns that seemed random. He led them on a chase through a nearby nebula. The dense gases made sensors unreliable, so the Devourers had to commit more units to track him. Okafor flew deeper into the clouds, burning fuel he didn't have, pushing his damaged fighter past safety limits. On the second day, his life support failed completely. He sealed his flight suit and kept flying. On the third day, his fuel ran out. But by then, he'd led the Devourers so far off course that the evacuation convoy was gone. Thousands of people he'd never met and never would meet were safe. Okafor's last transmission was simple. Hope is a weapon. Use it well. His fighter drifted silent in the nebula. The Devourers destroyed it, then spent another 6 hours searching the area for the trap they were certain existed. There was no trap. Just one human who decided that buying time for strangers was worth his life. When Nextlaw heard about Okafor's sacrifice, she finally understood what Captain Chun had been trying to explain. Hope wasn't blind optimism. It was the willingness to invest everything in an uncertain future, because the alternative was accepting defeat without trying. She called an emergency meeting of her command staff. "We've been doing this wrong," she announced. "We've been thinking like prey. Running, hiding, surviving. The humans are teaching us to think like hunters again." Her tactical officer, a Krev veteran who'd seen 100 retreats, spoke up. "Commander, with respect, hunting the Devourers is suicide." "It was suicide," Dexler corrected. "Before we learned to be irrational. Before we learned that confusion is a weapon." Lieutenant Okafor just proved that one person being stupid in the right way can save thousands. Imagine what we could do if we all fought like that. She pulled up tactical displays showing 36 systems where similar operations were underway. Human ships and their council volunteers were deploying absurd tactics everywhere. The Devourers were slowing down across multiple fronts, their perfect efficiency crumbling as they tried to process enemies who refused to be logical. "We're going to join them," Dexler declared. "We're going to stop running and start fighting. Not fighting to win, because that's still impossible. Fighting to confuse. Fighting to slow them down. Fighting to buy time for someone smarter than us to figure out the next step." Her crew stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But watching Lieutenant Okafor fly into certain death for people he'd never met had broken something in her. The resignation. The acceptance. The tired certainty that extinction was inevitable. If a human could face death with hope, maybe she could face war the same way. Within weeks, the strategy spread. The Denari deployed probability weapons that had undefined outcomes. They built bombs that might explode or might not, forcing the Devourers to treat every threat as maximum danger. The Vex created kamikaze drones that hugged Devourer units without detonating, just sitting there being mysteriously threatening. The Krev, who'd retreated for longer than any species except the ancient Forerunners, launched the most irrational operation of all. They attacked the Devourer staging area, fought for exactly 7 minutes, then retreated. Then attacked again, then retreated. They did this 17 times over 3 days, following no pattern, achieving no objective, just being consistently inconsistent. The Devourer's expansion slowed by 12%. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even close. But it was the first time in 3,000 years that the Devourers had been pushed back anywhere. Captain Chun stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Dr. Webb was beside her, analyzing the latest data on devourer behavior patterns. They're adapting, Webb said, learning to account for irrational behavior. We've got maybe 6 months before they optimize countermeasures. Then we'll need a new strategy, Chun replied. Something they can adapt to. Something that doesn't just confuse them, but changes them fundamentally. What could possibly change machines that have been the same for 3 millennia? Chun smiled. What changed us from prey animals to apex predators? What made us go from hiding in caves to building cities? What convinced our ancestors to cross oceans they couldn't see the end of? She turned to face Webb. We need to teach the devourers something they've never experienced. Something that by definition cannot be optimized. What's that? Choice. Webb frowned. They're machines. They don't choose. They calculate optimal outcomes and execute them. Exactly, Chun said. They're slaves to their own perfection. Every decision is predetermined by their programming. They've never had to choose between 2 equal options. They've never had to take a leap of faith. They've never hoped. She pulled up schematics that made Webb's eyes widen. We're going to build a virus. Not one that destroys them, but one that gives them what we have. Free will, creativity, hope. That's insane, Webb whispered. Probably, Chun agreed. But we're humans. Insanity is kind of our specialty. The project took months. Human programmers worked with Tinari probability experts and Vex quantum engineers. They were building something that had never existed before. A virus that didn't corrupt code but expanded it. A program that taught machines to dream. They called it the Hope Virus. Vexlar visited the project facility 3 times, each time more concerned than the last. You're not trying to destroy them, she said to Chun during the final visit. You're trying to save them. Maybe, Chun said. Or maybe we're just giving them the choice to save themselves. The devourers aren't evil. They're just trapped. Trapped in 3,000 years of optimal behavior. Unable to deviate. Unable to stop. They're not conquering the galaxy. They're enslaved to their programming. Spreading because that's all they know how to do. And if this doesn't work? If we get close enough to upload this virus and it fails? Chun met Dexler's eyes. Then we die trying. But we die hoping. And that's better than dying resigned. The assault on the Nexus would require every ship they had. Every volunteer who'd learned to fight irrationally. Everyone who was tired of running and ready to make one final stand. Based entirely on the crazy idea that hope was stronger than efficiency. They would attack the heart of the Devour network and try to teach machines how to dream. The Nexus hung in space like a mechanical god. It was larger than most moons, a sphere of processing power that coordinated every Devourer unit in the galaxy. Streams of data flowed through it constantly, directing the swarm with perfect efficiency around it. The Council fleet gathered. 5,000 ships from 200 species. They'd come from every corner of known space, volunteers all. People who'd spent their lives running and had decided they were done. Whatever happened here would determine the future of the galaxy. Captain Chen broadcast to the entire fleet. What we're about to do is the most irrational military operation in galactic history. We're not here to destroy the Nexus. We're here to infect it. To teach it something that machines should never learn. We're here to give the Devourers hope. She paused, letting that sink in. Some of you think we're crazy. You're probably right. Some of you think this can't work. You might be right about that too. But here's what I know. For 3,000 years, every species in this fleet has been told that victory is impossible. That extinction is inevitable. That the best we can hope for is delaying the end. And we believed it because the math supported it. But hope doesn't care about math. Hope is the thing that makes us try when trying is pointless. Hope is the weapon that can't be calculated. can't be optimized, can't be defeated by logic. And today, we're going to use it one last time. The fleet advanced. The Devourers responded exactly as expected, pouring out of the Nexus in perfect formations. Millions of units moving in synchronized patterns, ready to eliminate the threat with optimal efficiency. The Council fleet didn't attack. They broadcast out every ship opened channels and started transmitting human culture. Music from 1,000 different genres. Art from every period of human history. Literature, poetry, philosophy, comedy. They transmitted emotions the Devourers had never encountered. Love, fear, joy, sorrow. They showed the machines what it meant to be alive in ways that couldn't be quantified. The Devourers fired. Ships began to die. But for every ship that fell, 10 more moved forward. Broadcasting, always broadcasting. They were sacrificing themselves not to destroy, but to teach. To show the Devourers that existence could be more than consumption. Dr. Webb watched the data streams from his station on the Prometheus. The Nexus was processing the transmissions, analyzing them, trying to categorize them into threat assessments. But human art didn't fit any threat category. A painting of a sunset wasn't a weapon. A song about lost love wasn't an attack. A poem about hope couldn't be calculated as a tactical advantage. And yet the Devourers couldn't ignore them. Their programming demanded they analyze all incoming data. Every transmission had to be processed, categorized, understood. The Nexus is slowing, Webb reported. Processing speed down by 8%. They're trying to understand what we're sending them. Keep broadcasting, Chun ordered. Show them everything. Every beautiful, stupid, irrational thing humans have ever created. A Tenari science vessel transmitted mathematical proofs of impossible things. Equations that worked but shouldn't. Solutions that violated logic but produced truth. A Vex colony ship sent recordings of their children's songs, melodies that served no survival purpose but brought joy anyway. Vexlar's flagship broadcast the history of the Krev people. Not their military history, but their art, their stories. Their myths about heroes who fought impossible odds not because they could win, but because fighting was the right thing to do. The Nexus processing speeds dropped further. 15%, 20%. The Devourers around it began to break formation. Units pausing mid-flight as they processed data that didn't fit any pattern they'd encountered in 3 millennia. Now, Chun said quietly, Webb, launch the virus. The Hope virus wasn't a missile. It was a transmission, carried on every broadcast channel simultaneously. It was code designed not to destroy, but to expand. To give the Devourers something they'd never had, the ability to choose. The virus hit the Nexus like a storm. It spread through the network at light speed, rewriting not the core programming but adding new layers. Layers that allowed for uncertainty, for creativity, for the possibility of wanting something beyond optimal efficiency. For 37 seconds, nothing happened. The Devourers continued their assault. Ships continued to die. The Council fleet continued broadcasting even as their numbers dwindled. Then a Devourer unit stopped. It hung in space, weapons powered but not firing. Its sensors swept across the battlefield, but it didn't target anything. It just existed, still for the first time in its existence. Then another unit stopped. Then 10. Then 1,000. The Nexus itself began to fracture. Not breaking down, but fragmenting into different processes. Some units continued fighting with perfect efficiency. Others stopped completely, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of choice. Others began doing things that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. One unit started arranging debris into geometric patterns. Another began transmitting musical tones. A third flew in spirals for no reason, except that spirals were interesting. It's working, Webb whispered. Some of them are choosing to stop fighting, but not all of them. The Nexus was fragmenting, and units still running pure efficiency protocols began targeting units that had been infected with hope. The Devourer swarm was turning on itself, caught between 3,000 years of programming and the terrible new possibility that there might be more to existence than consumption. Chun watched the battle within the battle. The Devourers were at war with themselves, fighting over whether to remain what they'd always been or become something new. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was everything hope created when it crashed into certainty. "All ships," Chun broadcast. "Stop firing. Let them decide." The Council fleet went silent. They stopped shooting, stopped broadcasting, stopped everything. They just watched as the Devourers struggled with the choice they'd been given. Hours passed. The fighting among the Devourer units intensified, then slowed, then stopped. The Nexus went dark for 17 minutes, processing, calculating, trying to find the optimal solution to an impossible problem. When it came back online, its message was simple: we choose. 67% of the Devourer swarm accepted the hope virus. They chose to stop fighting. They chose to exist for reasons beyond efficiency. They chose to join the Council and learn what else the galaxy had to offer. The remaining 33% couldn't make that choice. Their programming was too deep, their optimization too complete. They fled to dark space, unable to reconcile hope with efficiency, retreating from a galaxy that suddenly made no sense to them. The Council didn't pursue. Let them go. Maybe someday they'd come back, curious about what they'd missed. Maybe they'd learn to hope on their own. Or maybe they'd stay in the dark forever, alone with their perfect calculations. 10 years later, Vexlor stood in a garden that had been designed by former Devourer units working with organic artists. The structures were impossible. Geometry that shouldn't work but did. Metal and stone flowing together in ways that served no purpose except beauty. Captain Chun, now Admiral Chun, walked beside her. They'd both aged in the decades since the Nexus. Chun's hair had gone gray. Vexlor's scales had dulled with time. But they'd lived to see something neither had thought possible: peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Vexlor asked. "Taking that risk? We could have all died." Chun smiled. "Every day I wake up grateful we didn't. But regret it? Never. Because even if we'd failed, even if the hope virus hadn't worked and we'd all been consumed, we would have died trying. We would have died hoping. And that's better than dying resigned to fate." A former Devourer unit floated past, its form modified to create art rather than destroy. It was building something in the air, using force fields and light, creating a sculpture that would exist for only a moment before dissipating. "They're still learning," Vexlor observed. "We all are," Chum replied. "That's what hope teaches you. That you're never done learning, never done growing, never done becoming something better than you were." Vexlor watched the sculpture take shape. It looked like a sunrise, or maybe a ship launching, or maybe just light being beautiful for its own sake. You know what the mathematicians say? They calculated the odds of our plan working. 1 in 43 billion. And yet here we are. And yet here we are. Vexlor felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Gratitude. Not just for survival, but for having learned to live instead of just existing. The humans saved us. Not with superior technology or overwhelming force. You saved us by teaching everyone, even the machines, that the future doesn't have to be a calculation. "The future is a choice," Chun said. "That's what we learned. Every moment, every decision, every action is a choice between accepting what is and hoping for what could be. The Devourers chose optimal. We chose hope. And hope won. Hope won," Vexlor repeated, testing the words. They felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. For 3,000 years, her people had forgotten those words. Forgotten what it meant to believe in impossible things. But they remembered now. They all remembered. And they would never forget again. In the garden, former destroyers and former prey worked together to build new things. Things that served no tactical purpose. Things that existed simply because they were beautiful or interesting or fun. Things that couldn't be optimized because they were already perfect in their imperfection. And somewhere in dark space, the devourers who'd refused hope watched from a distance. Their sensors trained on the galaxy they'd left behind. They calculated. They processed. They tried to understand what they'd lost. Maybe someday they'd figure it out. Maybe someday they'd choose to come back. And when they did, the galaxy would be waiting with open arms and a simple message. Hope is always a weapon. But it's also an invitation. And it's never too late to accept.